The energy in the studio was electric. The cameras were rolling, the audience was warmed up, and the late-night atmosphere was set. Jimmy Kimmel leaned back in his chair, the usual grin on his face, as Samuel L. Jackson walked onto the stage. The crowd erupted into applause. Jackson, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit and lavender tie, waved confidently, a calm force of charisma. It was supposed to be just another promo night movie talk, some laughs and a few viral moments. But something else was about to unfold. The interview started smoothly. Kimmel joked about Jackson's intense workout routine, and the actor threw back some playful jabs. The audience was loving it. They talked about Jackson's new action film, about explosions, car chases, and stunts. Clips rolled, the crowd clapped, and everything seemed perfectly scripted. But then, without warning, Kimmel shifted. His voice remained casual, but his tone took on a different edge. "Sam," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "you've been kind of everywhere lately. Interviews, social media, some folks say you've gotten a little too preachy." The studio's energy changed instantly. Laughter died, replaced by silence so sharp it felt like a warning. Jackson's smile faded. He looked at Kimmel, head slightly tilted, like he was trying to decide if this was a joke. "Preachy?" He repeated, his voice low but firm. "I call it using my damn voice." The crowd chuckled nervously. Kimmel leaned in, still trying to play it off. Right, he said, waving a hand. "But don't you think sometimes people just want to see Nick Fury, not hear about systemic racism at award shows? That did it." Jackson sat back in, his chair eyes locked on the host. His voice dropped, but each word hit like a punch. "So let me get this straight. You brought me on your show not to talk about my work, not to talk about what I've lived through, but to try and tell me what I should or shouldn't say when I'm not on your damn couch." Kimmel tried to lighten the mood, raising his hands. "Come on, Sam. It's all in good fun. People just want a little break from the heavy stuff." "You mean?" Jackson said slowly. "People tune in to ignore reality." There was a long pause. It's the kind that swallows noise, even the band stopped playing. Kimmel sat frozen, realizing he might have stepped into something deeper than he was ready for. "Look, let's just keep it light," he said, his smile starting to crack. "We can roll the movie clip talk about explosions again?" Jackson didn't move. "You're not trying to keep it light. You're trying to keep it comfortable for you, for your sponsors, for the people who'd rather hear a punchline than the truth." Kimmel looked toward his producers off stage, clearly hoping for a signal, a joke, a life raft. It came. "You don't want a guest," Jackson continued. "You want a puppet. You want to control the moment, but you don't control me." With that, he calmly unhooked his microphone, stood up, and handed it to a stunned stagehand. "I think we're done here." And just like that, he turned and walked off stage. The audience didn't clap. They didn't laugh. They just sat, stunned. You could hear a pin drop. Kimmel remained in his chair, stiff, his usual wit lost. The band began to play a soft jazz riff, but it felt wrong, like music at a funeral. Backstage, chaos erupted. A producer was already yelling into a headset, asking if they could cut the live feed. But it was too late. The entire exchange had been broadcast, raw and unedited. Within minutes, clips of the moment were everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, hashtags exploded. Hashtag Samuel Speaks. Hashtag Kimmel Cutoff. Hashtag Reality Check Live. People weren't just watching. They were arguing, reacting, reposting. Some praised Jackson for refusing to be silenced. Others accused him of being too sensitive. But no one could deny what had happened. The moment wasn't scripted. It was real. Kimmel's team rushed to control the damage. Statements were drafted. PR agents called networks. Jackson, meanwhile, issued nothing. No tweet, no comment. He didn't need to. The video said everything. That night, news outlets ran the clip on a loop. Opinion panels debated the role of celebrities in political discourse. Was it Jackson's job to keep it fun? Or was he right to use his voice even when the stage wasn't comfortable? In the quiet of a Los Angeles editing suite, one ABC, executives stared at the freeze frame of Jackson walking off stage. That wasn't just a walkout, she said to no one in particular. That was a turning point, and it was. Because what happened on that stage wasn't about one man, one movie, or one question. It was about the line between entertainment and truth, and what happens when someone refuses to let that line blur. The fallout from the broadcast was immediate and chaotic. Within hours, the video had crossed every digital border. News anchors replayed the clip with slow-motion commentary, while social media timelines flooded with hashtags like #SamuelUnfiltered and #Kimmel silenced. In living rooms across the country, families debated whether Samuel L. Jackson was out of line or just brutally honest. The conversation had escaped late-night television. It was now everywhere: morning shows, podcasts, political panels. ABC released a carefully worded statement that called the incident an unanticipated divergence from the planned content, adding that they deeply respect Mr. Jackson's passion and contributions to film and culture. But it didn't sound sincere, and people knew it. Online, users mocked the network's attempt to calm the firestorm. Kimmel remained unusually silent. For a man who made a living with words, his silence only added more fuel. Meanwhile, inside a New York townhouse far from the noise, Samuel sat with his longtime manager, Alicia Mendez, watching the coverage roll in. She poured a glass of whiskey and slid it across the table. "You know, this is going to go deeper than just some internet noise," she said. "I know," Jackson replied, still watching the screen. "They're going to spin it every way they can." "What you said? You mean people tune in to ignore reality? They're quoting that like scripture," Alicia added. "There's more coming. Political PACs, media watchdogs. They'll either praise you or use it to tear something else down." "I didn't do it for them," he said flatly. She nodded. "I know. But now you're part of something bigger." At the same time, inside ABC's production headquarters in Burbank, a tense emergency meeting unfolded. The producers and legal team reviewed every second of the footage. They weren't just worried about ratings, they were worried about lawsuits. Sponsors had already started pulling ad slots for the rerun. One executive suggested editing future broadcasts with a delay to prevent such incidents. Another pitched an idea for Kimmel to do a clarifying monologue, but not everyone agreed. One younger producer, Marcus, leaned forward and asked, "What if this wasn't a mistake? What if it was a moment people actually needed to hear?" He was met with blank stares. Back in Los Angeles, Jimmy Kimmel was alone in his dressing room, watching the same clip everyone else was. Over the moment Samuel leaned forward, the way the laughter died. The way he walked off stage with dignity and rage woven together. Kimmel rewound the tape again. He saw himself on the screen, smiling, cracking jokes, then losing control. He looked away from the monitor and buried his face in his hands. His producer knocked. "You want to say something tonight? Maybe address it in the monologue." Kimmel didn't respond right away. "Not yet," he finally said. "Let it breathe." But outside that room, it wasn't breathing. It was spreading. Political commentators on both the right and left grabbed hold of the moment for their own purposes. Some said Samuel had destroyed liberal late-night hypocrisy. Others said it was a black man being silenced for telling uncomfortable truths. A former senator tweeted what Samuel L. Jackson said in 2 minutes. Congress hasn't been brave enough to say in 2 decades. What no one yet knew was that Jackson's walkout had stirred something deeper, something old. That same night, an anonymous tip reached the inbox of The Intercept, a digital investigative news outlet. The email was short and cryptic. Jackson's anger wasn't just about Kimmel. Check the archive. 1994. National Black Arts Conference. He saw something there, and he never forgot. The editor-in-chief, Lena Hassan, flagged it immediately. She'd been following Jackson's activism for years. If this tip was real, it meant the outburst wasn't just spontaneous. Reject was personal. She assigned a team to dig into the conference, its speakers, and any political connections to ABC or its sponsors during the 1990s. What they found in the following days would change everything. But for now, the world only had the footage. The fire was lit. Debates raged across campuses, city councils, and morning radio shows. On one campus in Atlanta, students marched holding signs that read, "Reality isn't preachy, it's truth." And at the center of it all, the man who hadn't said a word since leaving that stage remained quiet. No tweets, no press releases. Just the last words he'd said before walking off, replaying endlessly in every corner of the internet. You wanted a moment, you just got one. The following morning, Jimmy Kimmel returned to his studio like a man walking through fog. The energy in the hallways was strange, tense, hushed. Crew members who normally joked freely now nodded silently, avoided eye contact. He passed by the control room where the clip from the night before was still being replayed, this time slowed down with subtitles. Samuel L. Jackson's final words echoed faintly from the monitors. Jimmy paused briefly, watching his own expression on screen, a mixture of discomfort and confusion frozen in high definition. Then he turned and walked toward the writer's room. Inside, the staff sat around the conference table, quiet until he entered. Papers rustled, laptops clicked shut. One of the head writers, a bearded man named Jonas, cleared his throat. Need to talk about how we're opening tonight? Let's not make this another manufactured apology, Jimmy said, pulling out a chair. The world doesn't need another safe monologue. Safe is what the network wants. Another writer replied. They're already under pressure from ad sponsors. They want you to downplay it, make it seem like the moment just got away from you. Jimmy looked at the floor. Didn't just get away. It hit me. Harder than I want to admit. Jonas leaned forward. So, what now? You turn it into a joke? Or you say something real? I don't know yet, Jimmy muttered. Pretending like it didn't matter? That's not an option. Across the country, Samuel L. Jackson was already one step ahead. He agreed to appear in a live, unscripted conversation with The Intercept. No agents, no handlers. Just him and a journalist he trusted, Lena Hassan. The studio was minimalist, a black backdrop, 2 chairs, 2 microphones. When the feed went live, hundreds of thousands tuned in within minutes. Lena opened softly. The moment with Jimmy Kimmel, was that planned? Jackson shook his head. Hell no. I was there to talk about a film. But when someone challenges your voice, your right to speak freely about injustice, and does it behind a grin, it hits different. You said, people tune in to ignore reality. What reality were you talking about? The one they don't want to see, Jackson replied, his voice steady. The reality that people like me have always had to carry. That we get called preachy when we talk about pain. That entertainment has become a way to numb conscience. Lena nodded. We received a tip. Said this moment might trace back to something you saw in 1994. A conference. You want to talk about that? Jackson's jaw tightened. Blink. I remember, he said. The National Black Arts Conference, Atlanta. I was invited to speak. But I wasn't prepared for what I found backstage. Lena waited. There was a meeting. Private politicians, executives, media consultants. I walked in looking for a dressing room and found a strategy session. They weren't talking about art. They were talking about how to control it. How to reshape Black narrative to fit national objectives. Their words, not mine. And? You never said anything? I tried, Jackson replied. Few interviews? No one printed it. My publicist got calls. Threats about ruining contracts. Had a choice: keep working or fight shadows. I stayed quiet until now. The internet exploded again. The story was no longer about a Hollywood star walking off a late-night stage. It was now about systemic manipulation, racial erasure, and cultural control stretching back decades. Old footage of the 1994 conference resurfaced: grainy clips, guest lists, speeches. One shot showed a younger Jackson walking past the camera with a stiff expression. Online detectives began matching names, companies, even noting that two of the attendees later joined boards at major media networks, including ABC, within hours. Jackson's revelation was trending across multiple platforms. Hashtag #ArtsManipulated and hashtag Jackson Spoke rose to the top. Pressure mounted on Kimmel, not just as a host, but as someone tied to a much deeper system. At ABC headquarters, executives were in crisis mode. PR teams drafted talking points. Legal teams reviewed broadcast licenses. There were quiet calls to Capitol Hill. This wasn't just a viral moment anymore, it was national. In D.C., several Congress members called for an independent investigation into historical media influence over racial narratives. One fiery representative quoted Jackson directly on the House floor. "This ain't about Hollywood. It's about who gets to speak. And who gets told to smile while being silenced." By nightfall, the world had changed again. Jimmy stood backstage holding a cue card for a monologue he didn't believe in. The lights were up, the crowd was ready. But he wasn't. He turned to his producer. "I want 5 minutes. No jokes. Just me." The producer hesitated, then nodded. 5. But that's it. As the band played and the audience applauded, Jimmy walked out and faced the cameras. He didn't smile. "Last night, something real happened on this stage," he began. "And instead of listening, I tried to spin it into entertainment. I failed. But I heard you, Sam, and I'm listening now." The studio fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't awkward. Was honest. Somewhere watching live, Samuel L. Jackson nodded quietly. For the first time in years, the man who played heroes had become one without needing a costume. That same night, while Jimmy Kimmel stood under the studio lights delivering his unscripted apology, another storm was quietly brewing behind the scenes, this time in the corridors of power. The resurfaced footage from the 1994 National Black Arts Conference had caught the attention of a much larger audience than expected. Among them, a team of investigative journalists from a global news network and several international human rights lawyers who had been compiling a dossier on cultural manipulation in Western media. One name kept appearing in connection to the 1994 event: Gregory Talbot, a now retired media executive who once served as a key liaison between U.S. intelligence consultants and private broadcast networks. He hadn't been seen in public in nearly a decade, but after Jackson's interview went viral, an anonymous source sent Lena Hassan a cryptic message. Talbot's archive is in Zurich. Kept everything. By morning, Lena and her crew were on a flight to Switzerland, carrying with them a legal team and a documentary filmmaker who had previously worked on exposing Cold War media propaganda. The stakes had escalated far beyond celebrity drama. We're digging into something systemic. Something that touched not only racial narratives in entertainment, but also how those narratives shaped foreign perception of America's internal affairs. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Samuel L. Jackson received a private message from an encrypted email account. No name, no introduction, just 3 words. They never forgot. Attached was a scanned memo from 1995, marked Eyes Only Domestic Media Strategy Unit. It referenced Jackson's appearance at the arts conference and labeled him non-compliant talent, monitor closely. Jackson sat silently at his kitchen table, staring at the screen. It was all there, in cold government language. He had been watched, labeled, and restrained not with shackles, but with silence. He forwarded the document to Lena and made a call. "Set up another interview," he told her. "This one's not about me." It's about everyone else who was silenced too. At the same time, Jimmy Kimmel's network was unraveling. An internal whistleblower leaked meeting notes from a 2021 strategy session where senior producers discussed tonal alignment with political narratives. The notes included guidance on which celebrities could express political opinions without backlash, and which ones needed boundaries. One of the names listed Samuel L. Jackson. The revelations sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Several other actors began coming forward, some anonymously, others publicly. They described years of quiet pressure, roles pulled at the last minute, scripts edited to remove uncomfortable truths, and publicists warning them to not say too much at award shows or interviews. This was no longer a Kimmel problem. It was a culture war within the entertainment industry. Back in Washington, a bipartisan group of lawmakers proposed a resolution calling for a congressional hearing into historical media suppression and racial narrative engineering. They cited Samuel L. Jackson's viral moment as the catalyst for a national reckoning. But not everyone was supportive. A group of conservative commentators accused Jackson of playing the victim card. Others framed the movement as Hollywood eating itself. Social media became a battleground where bots, trolls, and real users collided in arguments about freedom, censorship, and history. Through it all, Jackson remained calm. He wasn't tweeting. He wasn't doing talk shows. He was preparing for something bigger. In Zurich, Lena Hassan and her team located Talbot's archive in a private vault. They were granted access under the protection of a whistleblower clause invoked by international media freedom law. Inside the vault were thousands of documents, memos, audio tapes, internal reports from media boards, even psychological studies on audience reactions to political race-based storylines in films and shows. The most disturbing file was dated 1997. It described a media pilot program called Echo Curve, a joint venture between a cable news provider and a federal research lab. The goal: test subliminal narrative injection through sitcoms and variety shows. Test subjects were shown laugh track-based programming that subtly reinforced biases, then surveyed days later on political beliefs. The report's conclusion: audience memory of political dialogue is reduced by 60% when humor is inserted at conflict points. In the early hours of the morning, as cable news networks debated the fallout of Samuel L. Jackson's now iconic walkout from Jimmy Kimmel Live, a very different conversation was taking place inside a secure server room just outside Geneva. Lena Hassan's team had decrypted more than 200 files from the Zurich archive of evidence that showed, in stark clarity, how racial messaging had been manipulated by entertainment networks under pressure from private and governmental interests over decades. It wasn't just scripts or casting decisions. There were charts mapping when Black actors were allowed to speak on certain political issues, @Alan memos rating them on likability across demographic divides. Samuel L. Jackson, Denzel Washington, Angela Bassett, dozens of T-cells. Names appeared across documents labeled with coded terms like containable, high risk, or media volatile. But the most explosive file was dated April 2003. It referenced a classified meeting between top network executives and a liaison from an unnamed federal agency. The subject: suppressing activist speech after the Iraq War protests. The report listed Jackson by name. Subject shows increasing alignment with anti-state rhetoric. Recommend indirect containment via editorial framing and late-night personality conflict. Lena printed the page and sent a photo to Jackson. You remember doing a press conference in April 2003? She asked him over a secure line. Jackson paused, the memory clicking into place. Yeah, he said. Spoke out about the invasion. Said we were chasing ghosts for oil. Scott pulled off 3 interviews that week. Didn't think much of it then. Now he knew why. That same morning, Kimmel's network issued a formal statement. They labeled the incident regrettable, but insisted there was no intent to silence any guest. Yet inside the building, staff were in revolt. One assistant leaked a text exchange between producers that took place just minutes before the taping. "Let's poke the politics, see if he bites." Sam's always good for a viral moment. The story spread like wildfire. Hashtags multiplied. Hashtag Echo Curve. Hashtag Jackson Files. Hashtag Media Machine. The New York Times ran a banner headline: "The joke's over. Late night TV faces its reckoning." Behind closed doors, executives scrambled. Advertising deals were threatened. Staff writers walked off set. One former producer appeared on live television and dropped a revelation. Jimmy Kimmel had approved the preachy question himself, ignoring team objections. It was never meant to be a real question, it was bait. Meanwhile, the U.S. House Committee on Media Ethics called for an emergency session. Lawmakers, some outraged, some terrified, began discussing the implications of Lena's investigation. If proven accurate, it would mean American media wasn't just biased, but strategically curated by influence networks spanning corporations, government advisors, and psychological warfare units. And yet, the story was no longer confined to the U.S. in South Africa. Newspapers ran translated copies of the Zurich documents. In Berlin, crowds protested outside a streaming giant's headquarters with signs reading, "Truth has no laugh." Track. In São Paulo, an activist group launched a global petition demanding a UN investigation into cultural suppression through entertainment. Overnight, Samuel L. Jackson had become more than a movie star. He had become the face of a global media reckoning. He wasn't sure he wanted the role. That evening, he sat alone in a modest studio in D.C., preparing to record the voiceover for Lena's documentary. The script was powerful raw facts, clear history, and a thread of emotional honesty that made the truth impossible to ignore. But as Jackson looked over the words, he paused. "I want to add something," he said. Lena, listening through her earpiece from Geneva, nodded. "Say it." Jackson leaned into the mic, his voice steady. "This isn't just about me. This isn't just about late-night comedy or politics. It's about truth, about who gets to speak it, about who gets muted while the world laughs. I've been angry before, but now I'm ready. I hope you are too." He clicked the record button. Hours later, the team finished editing. The film, titled The Echo Curve, was scheduled to broadcast globally at 9 p.m. EST the next night. Simulcast in 40 countries, with full audio transcripts released in over a dozen languages. It wasn't just a documentary, it was evidence. It was coming. Back at Jimmy Kimmel's studio, the air was thick with uncertainty. Ratings had plummeted. The next night's show was canceled. Kimmel himself had gone quiet. Some believed he was preparing his own statement. Others whispered he might resign. But across Los Angeles, across America, across the world, millions waited, not for jokes, but for the truth they were never supposed to hear. And Samuel L. Jackson, once silenced in a room full of laughter, had finally found the one thing louder than applause. History inside a quiet editing suite in Washington, D.C. Samuel L. Jackson sat beside Lena Hassan, eyes fixed on the screen as the echo curve played through its final minutes. The film had taken on a life of its own, moving beyond the initial confrontation with Jimmy Kimmel and evolving into a sweeping expose of media manipulation, censorship disguised as entertainment, and decades of racially coded silencing. The opening scene replayed Jackson's now infamous moment on late-night TV, but quickly expanded into a series of whistleblower interviews, decrypted intelligence documents, and confessionals from former network executives. It wove a pattern few had dared to admit: how institutions used comedy, fame, and celebrity relationships to redirect uncomfortable truths into punchlines. Outside, protesters gathered near news headquarters in Times Square, carrying signs that read "No more scripts, no more silence." Screens displayed hashtags like #TheEchoCurve and #FreeToSpeak. And truck-mounted speakers played lines from Jackson's walk-off moment. You wanted a moment, you just got one. But now there was a deeper storm brewing. That morning, a confidential briefing reached Capitol Hill. Members of Congress were handed a 72-page dossier from Lena's team, copies of internal memos, timestamps of editorial interference. And something even more explosive. Surveillance logs. U.S. intelligence agencies had monitored specific celebrities based on rhetorical instability, a term used to justify covert suppression of voices, considered too unpredictable. Jackson was number 4 on the list. As the committee gathered in a closed-door session, Representative Monica Reyes, a centrist Democrat from California, read aloud from the dossier. Her voice shook slightly as she said, "If proven true, this indicates coordinated political censorship conducted through entertainment infrastructure. This isn't just media bias, it's information control." Reporters outside the chamber caught wind of the words and broadcast them immediately. Within an hour, the White House press secretary was asked directly, "Is the U.S. government manipulating celebrity voices to avoid political unrest?" The answer was a non-denial. "We support a free and vibrant press," she said, but her nervous tone told a different story. Meanwhile, Kimmel's studio was locked down. Armed guards appeared at the gates not because of threats, but because federal agents had arrived. A subpoena was served for all internal communications related to Jackson's interview: emails, meeting notes, raw footage. Inside the studio, producers whispered behind closed doors. Someone had leaked a relanted footage of a producer, telling Kimmel before the taping, "If he strays, steer him back with humor. If he pushes, cut to break. We want fireworks, not fallout." The reel hit the internet and went viral within minutes. Kimmel, facing the press for the first time in 3 days, stood outside his home, eyes bloodshot, voice heavy. "I didn't mean to silence anyone," he said. "But maybe I became part of something I didn't fully understand. I thought it was just a joke. Maybe it never was." But Jackson didn't want an apology. He wanted accountability. That evening, he appeared live on Newsline International, a global investigative news platform. With Lena beside him, he addressed millions of viewers. "I've played heroes and villains. But this ain't a role. This is real. They wanted me to be quiet. They wanted you to laugh while truth was being erased behind the curtain. But now the curtain's down." He paused, then added, "This story ain't just about me. It's about how truth dies when we trade reality for ratings. And it's about time we start asking who's writing the lines we speak." Across the globe, audiences responded. In Johannesburg, a university planned a media ethics symposium titled The Jackson Effect. In Tokyo, a streaming service picked up the echo curve for immediate release. In London, Parliament members called for an inquiry into international influence operations tied to Hollywood. What began as one man refusing to stay silent had become a cultural awakening. But behind the scenes, not everyone was pleased. Lena received an encrypted message late that night from a burner account. The contents were simple, a list of names. Hers was third. The subject line read, "Containment required." She stared at it, hands shaking, and forwarded the email to a contact she'd hoped never to call again. Within minutes, her secure phone rang. "Geneva's safe house is no longer secure," the voice said. "We're moving you both within the hour. Whatever you've uncovered, it's bigger than media." Lena looked to Samuel, who had just finished a final edit on the voiceover for their second documentary. One focused not on censorship, but on the intelligence networks embedded within studio advisory boards. "They're not just watching," she whispered. "They're playing the long game." They crossed the tarmac under the cover of night, rain slicking the pavement, wind howling against the fuselage of a nondescript military-grade jet. Lena Hassan glanced back once before boarding, half expecting floodlights or sirens. Instead, just silence. And Samuel L. Jackson, clutching the encrypted hard drives containing the next phase of their project, followed behind her. No cameras, no press, no red carpet, only purpose. The safe house they were flown to was buried deep in the Pacey, and the Austrian Alps gold remote and secure. By now, the Echo Curve had aired in 27 countries. Streaming platforms tried to bury it. But people uploaded it anyway. It was the kind of fire no algorithm could drown. Civil rights groups rallied. Media watchdogs formed new coalitions. College campuses erupted in screenings and spontaneous discussions. But so did government silence. Not denial, not rebuttal. Just silence. It was the kind that screamed louder than words. From inside the stone bunker, Lena traced connections. On a wall-sized map. Studios, intelligence proxies, data farms in Nevada, shell corporations in Bahrain, congressional donors, and three-letter agencies with blacked-out budgets. She had proof. Samuel had the voice, but now they needed protection. A coded message from an old European journalist contact arrived by hand. 6 words, he's ready to speak. One time. The journalist had spent years embedded in the intelligence community. The source, former U.S. media liaison for covert psychological operations, codename Leviathan. He had served under 5 administrations. No photos existed of him. Birth record. But he built systems that turned attention into obedience. If Leviathan talked, this wasn't just about silencing Samuel. It was about how the game had always been rigged. They agreed to the meeting, a cafe in Prague. It's 2 a.m., no phones, no cameras, just 3 people. When they arrived, the man who greeted them looked like a retired professor. Corduroy blazer, thick glasses, slow gait. But his words were scalpel, sharp. You think what you uncovered is new, he said. It's old. It started with Hollywood war reels and migrated to talk shows. The face changed. The method didn't. We fed the people what felt like freedom, but measured every heartbeat behind the scenes. Samuel leaned forward. Why now? The man smiled faintly. Because you broke the rhythm. And when people break rhythm, they stop dancing. He handed Lena a small leather case. Inside, a ledger. Names, sums, timestamps. Black budgets that had funded media disruption units. Comedians hired as soft power operators. Algorithms designed not just to push content but to shape outrage. Every revelation more damning than the last, but with the truth came danger. By the time they left Prague, surveillance teams had picked up their trail. A data leak from a private security firm revealed that a multinational agency, part corporate, part intelligence, had labeled Lena and Samuel as active threats to public continuity. A sanitized phrase for neutralize on sight. They couldn't go back. Instead, they went forward. The decision was made to leak the entire ledger, but not through traditional media. It's compromised. Too slow. They hacked the feed of the most watched. New Year's broadcast in the world, the global countdown spectacle. Right as the final seconds ticked down to midnight, the screen went black. Then a voice. Samuel, this isn't about left or right. It's about the strings tied to every voice you thought was free. This year, don't just wake up. Stay awake. The feed continued. Screenshots of documents, anonymized testimonies, faces of whistleblowers, decrypted files. It lasted exactly 2 minutes and 27 seconds before the networks regained control. But that was all it took. The next morning, chaos. The FCC demanded investigations. Senate hearings were called. The chair of a major media conglomerate resigned without explanation. Samuel's message became a slogan. Stay awake. Graffiti on billboards. Murals on city walls. Printed on T-shirts carved into park benches. Not as branding, but as warning. Jimmy Kimmel finally spoke. Live. No audience. No jokes. I was used, he admitted. But I let myself be used. And for that, I apologize to anyone I mocked while pretending it was just comedy. It wasn't enough for everyone. But it was something. In the end, Samuel and Lena disappeared from public view, their names etched into the fabric of a movement. But their faces no longer splashed across screens. Occasionally, a distorted voice would appear in an encrypted podcast, a written op signed only with an L. And each time, one phrase repeated: "The curtain is down. The actors are gone." Now, the people write the script, because sometimes the truth doesn't need a stage, just needs to be heard.